The storm came faster than we expected. The last weather report said light rain by evening, but now the mountains looked swallowed by clouds, thunder rolling across the ridges. Liam and I had spent the afternoon hiking the old forest trail, laughing about how we used to do this back in college, before jobs, before life got complicated. By the time the first drops hit, we were too far from the truck to turn back. Liam spotted a small ranger cabin up ahead, half hidden behind the trees, and we made a run for it. Inside, the place was simple. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, a single narrow bed, and a bench. It smelled of pine and smoke. There was no power, just the dim gray of daylight sneaking through a dusty window. We hung our wet jackets near the fire and watched the storm tighten its grip on the valley. Wind howled through the cracks, rain tapping the glass like restless fingers. Liam chuckled, shaking his hair out. "Guess our timing's still as bad as ever," he said. I smiled, trying not to stare too long. He hadn't changed much since college. Still had that easy grin, still wore his flannel sleeves rolled to the elbows like he was immune to the cold. When the light began to fade, I realized the temperature was dropping. The cabin had one thin blanket folded on the bed. I sat on the floor, rubbing my hands together for warmth, trying to act casual. "You take it," I said. "I'll be fine near the fire." Liam glanced over, eyebrow raised. "Don't be ridiculous," he said. "We'll share. There's plenty of room." His tone was simple, friendly, but something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just the cold. We sat side by side on the bed, the blanket pulled over our shoulders. The fire's glow flickered across his face, soft and uneven. Outside, the rain turned to sleet, drumming against the roof. He handed me a granola bar from his pack and grinned. Dinner of champions. I laughed, though it came out quieter than I meant. There was comfort in the sound of the storm, the isolation, the shared silence between us. It reminded me of the nights we'd spent studying together, when everything still felt easy and possible. As the wind howled harder, the cabin creaked. Liam leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. "Man, I miss this," he said. "Just being out here. No noise, no deadlines," his voice softened. "Ava hates camping. Says I come back more tired than when I left." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to pry, but I also didn't want to pretend I hadn't heard the hint of something deeper there. "You two still good?" I asked. He nodded too quickly. Yeah. You know how it is. Life just gets busy." We fell quiet again. The air between us felt different, heavier somehow. I could feel the warmth from his shoulder through the blanket, a steady reminder of how close we were. My mind kept drifting to things I shouldn't think about. Memories from years ago, when I'd catch myself watching him laugh at some stupid joke, or when he'd fall asleep on the couch during movie nights and I'd feel something I couldn't name. I thought those feelings had gone away. I thought I'd buried them under time and distance. Lightning flashed outside, lighting up the cabin for a split second. Liam opened his eyes, looked at me and smiled. "You still hate thunderstorms?" I shrugged. "Not when I'm inside." He laughed, the sound deep and genuine. "Good, because this one's not letting up anytime soon." He shifted slightly, pulling the blanket tighter around us. The fire crackled, throwing sparks up the chimney. For a moment, everything felt suspended. Just the two of us, the storm, the faint rhythm of rain. He started telling stories from college. How we'd gotten lost during that spring trip. How we'd eaten canned beans for 3 days straight. We both laughed until our sides hurt. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else, two younger versions of ourselves who hadn't yet learned about disappointment. As his laughter faded, he looked at me for a long moment, something thoughtful in his expression. "You were always the calm one," he said quietly, "even when everything went wrong. I don't think I ever told you how much I appreciated that." I looked away, not trusting my voice. There was sincerity in his tone that made it hard to breathe. "You don't have to," I said softly. "That's what friends do." He nodded, still watching me. The firelight flickered across his face again, catching in his eyes. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world outside stopped. The rain, the wind, even the creaking of the cabin. Then he spoke again, almost a whisper. "You always made me feel understood." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My pulse thudded in my ears. I lay back against the wall, pretending to close my eyes, hoping he wouldn't notice. The blanket shifted slightly as he turned away. The storm outside went on, but inside, the silence between us said everything neither of us dared to speak. And somewhere between the thunder and the steady rhythm of his breathing, I realized the night was going to feel longer than I'd thought. The wind outside hadn't stopped. It beat against the walls of the cabin like it was trying to get in. I woke sometime after midnight, unsure what stirred me. Maybe the thunder, maybe the cold. The fire had burned down to a few dull embers, and the room glowed faintly orange. For a moment I didn't move. Then I realized Liam's arm was across my chest, his hand resting lightly near my shoulder beneath the blanket. His breathing was steady and slow. I froze, not out of fear, but because I didn't know what this meant, what it said about either of us. I thought about sliding out from under his arm, but the air was freezing. The moment I shifted, he stirred. "You awake?" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." He adjusted slightly, his arm still resting where it was. "You're shaking," he said. "You're freezing." Before I could answer, he pulled the blanket tighter around both of us. The motion was small, simple, but my heart reacted like it was more than that. The warmth seeped into me, chasing the cold away, and I couldn't tell which part of me was trembling now, the body or the mind. For a long stretch, neither of us spoke. The rain hit the roof in slow waves, the kind of sound that usually made me feel safe, but now it felt heavy, like it pressed every thought into focus. Liam sighed, the sound soft and tired. "You ever feel like you're just existing? Like the days blur together, and you forget what it felt like to want something?" I turned my head slightly toward him. "Sometimes," I said. "Yeah." He chuckled under his breath. "Ava says I've been distant. She's right, I guess. I just don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. Work, eat, sleep, repeat." There was something raw in his tone. I wanted to tell him it was just stress, that things would pass, but it didn't feel like the truth he needed. "You're allowed to be tired," I said quietly. "Doesn't mean you don't care." He nodded but didn't speak. His thumb brushed against my sleeve almost absently, as if he didn't realize he'd done it. I felt that small motion like a pulse. I knew I should move, create distance, say something to pull us back to safe ground, but I didn't. Maybe I wanted to understand what he was really saying beneath the words. He took a long breath. "You know, I've thought about you sometimes," he said suddenly. "After college." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I don't know, just how easy things were with you. No expectations. You actually listened." He laughed softly, almost bitterly. "You'd be surprised how rare that gets once life starts happening." I could feel his gaze even in the dim light. I wanted to meet it, but was afraid of what I might see there. "You've got Ava," I said finally. "She loves you." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, she does. And I love her. It's just—" He stopped, the words catching. "Sometimes it feels like we're living parallel lives. Same house, same bed, but miles apart." The quiet that followed felt fragile, like one wrong word could break it. I tried to focus on the sound of the rain again, but the only thing I could hear was my heartbeat. "Liam," I said softly, "maybe you just need to talk to her." "Really talk," he exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just scared she'll see how much I've already drifted." His honesty hit harder than I expected. I turned toward him, just enough to see his face in the faint light. He looked tired, older somehow. "You're not a bad person for feeling lost," I said. "We all get there." He smiled faintly, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, unguarded second. "You always say the right thing," he murmured. "That's what I missed." The space between us felt impossibly small now. His hand brushed mine under the blanket, once, maybe by accident. Then again, slower. Neither of us pulled away. I could feel the warmth of his skin, the roughness of his fingers. I wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of everything that made this wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I whispered, "We shouldn't." My voice trailed off before I could finish. He nodded slightly. "I know," but he didn't move his hand. We sat there, both of us aware of what was happening, of what couldn't happen. The fire crackled softly. The storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of our uneven breaths. I closed my eyes, not to escape but to find control. "You ever wonder," he said after a while, "what life would have been like if things had gone differently?" I opened my eyes again. "All the time," I admitted. He gave a small, sad smile. "Yeah, me too." After that, we didn't say anything more. The moment lingered, heavy but unbroken. It wasn't about what either of us might have wanted. It was about what we both knew we couldn't allow. When he finally shifted away, the space he left behind felt colder than before. I stayed still, eyes on the dying fire, until the rain softened and sleep came again. Whatever passed between us that night wasn't spoken aloud, but it stayed, quiet, fragile, and far too real. Morning came slowly, like it didn't want to face what the night had left behind. The storm had passed, but the world outside was washed pale and quiet. I woke first. The fire was out completely, only a faint smell of smoke hanging in the air. Liam was still asleep beside me, one arm draped carelessly over the edge of the bed. For a moment, I just watched him, the way his face softened when he slept, free from the weight of whatever he carried. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. It was guilt that woke me fully. I sat up carefully, pulling the blanket away from us both. The cold bit at my skin, but I needed space to think. My thoughts replayed the night in flashes, the words, the silence, the way neither of us stopped it soon enough. Nothing truly happened, not in the way people define it, but something still shifted, and we both knew it. I tried to convince myself it was just comfort, just warmth, just a moment of weakness in the middle of a storm. But lies never settle quietly for long. When Liam stirred, I turned away, pretending to check my phone for signal. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. For a few seconds, neither of us said a word. Then he spoke first. "You slept at all?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Some," I said. "You?" He gave a short laugh. "Barely. Kept thinking the roof would blow off." It was a weak attempt at humor, and we both knew it. He looked down at his hands. "About last night," I cut in too quickly. "We don't have to talk about it." My voice came out steadier than I felt. He nodded once, like he was relieved and disappointed all at once. "Yeah, maybe that's for the best." We got dressed in silence, packed what little we had, and stepped outside. The forest smelled fresh, rainwater dripping from the trees, everything glittering faintly under the early light. The air was cold but not unbearable. I wanted to believe the storm had washed everything clean, even what happened between us. But it hadn't. The hike back to the truck felt longer than it should have. The trail was muddy, our boots sinking into the softened ground. Liam walked ahead most of the way, his shoulders tense beneath his backpack. I followed behind, trying to find something to say, something that wouldn't sound hollow. Finally, near the clearing, I spoke. "You're heading back to the city today?" He nodded. "Yeah, Ava's making dinner tonight. She's probably wondering if I froze out here." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. When we reached the truck, he turned toward me. The silence between us carried more weight than the rain-soaked air. "Ethan," he said quietly, "I'm sorry if anything last night made you uncomfortable." I shook my head. "You didn't. We were just cold. It was a long night, that's all." The lie came easy, but the ache behind it didn't. He nodded again, forcing a small grin. "Yeah, just the cold." The drive back into town was uneventful. He hummed along to the radio, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. I stared out the window, watching the landscape blur. Every so often, I caught him glancing at me, but neither of us said a word. When we finally pulled into the diner parking lot where my car was waiting, he put the truck in park and sighed. "Take care of yourself, okay?" he said. I nodded. "You too." He smiled once more, then reached out, hesitated, and gave my shoulder a light squeeze before letting go. That small touch felt like goodbye. I watched him drive off, the taillights disappearing into the morning haze. I stood there for a while, the world quiet around me. I should have felt relief, but instead, there was just emptiness. A hollow space where something used to be. Maybe friendship, maybe something we were never supposed to name. Weeks passed before I heard from him again. Just a short message, made it back safe. "Thanks for coming out," Ava says hi. I stared at the text for a long time, typing and deleting several replies before settling on a simple, "Glad you're home." "Take care. That was the last time we spoke." Sometimes late at night, I still think about that cabin. Not about what happened, but about what didn't. The almosts, the silences, the truths left unspoken. I think about how easily a line can blur when loneliness meets memory. We convince ourselves it's harmless, that we can stop it before it becomes something more. But feelings don't follow rules. They sneak in quietly like a draft through an open window. If there's one thing that night taught me, it's that infidelity doesn't always need a moment of betrayal to exist. Sometimes it lives in thoughts, in glances, in the comfort we shouldn't reach for. It's the part of us that hungers for connection even when we already have it somewhere else. I don't blame him, and I don't hate myself for caring. We were two people caught in a storm trying to stay warm. Still, whenever I see a forecast for rain, I think of that cabin, the firelight flickering, the storm outside, and the words I never said. Maybe that's how life works. Some people pass through and leave behind a truth you can't quite name, a lesson about boundaries and the fragile line between comfort and temptation. In the end, the storm stopped, the sky cleared, and we both went back to our lives. But I know a part of that night will always stay with me. The warmth, the silence, and everything we didn't let happen. ChatGPT,